Hello and welcome to a special episode of To The Point. In 6 days' time, the Modi government will complete 2 years in office. What has been its track record over this period? What are its successes? And where are the areas where it needs to do more? Those are the key issues I shall explore today with the Vice Chairman of Niti Aayog, one of Columbia University's most renowned professors of economics, Arvind Panagariya. Professor Panagariya, as I said, in 6 days' time, the Modi government will complete 2 years in office. Before we come to specifics and details, has the second year been better than the first as far as the economy is concerned? And if the answer is yes, what are your two main reasons for saying so?
Well, we are making progress. We did a number of things in the first year, not a number of things in the second year. You always get some acceleration, because first year you are also setting up the whole system, procedures are being worked out, and a lot of the what you inherited also determines what you are able to do in the first year. And then in second year you have the processes in place, so it gives you a little bit more.
But for clarity, is the second year better than the first?
Well, that depends on the metric, right? Because you accomplished certain things which are important to accomplish in the first year, and you then accomplished more things in the second year, and really
so it's a continuum.
Well, it's a continuum, because the metric you can apply to the first year is different than the metric you would apply to the second year.
Let me raise with you 3 areas of concern that have occurred during the first 2 years so that you can address them. To begin with, there is no doubt that in terms of macro performance, this economy has done rather well. Growth is at 7.6%, inflation may have edged up, but it's still only 5.3%. The CAD and fiscal deficits are in very comfortable territory, and we have record FDI. But at the micro level, the picture is more disconcerting. Private cap investment is virtually paralyzed, as T. N. Nayanan has said. And except for the last quarter, corporate growth and revenue has actually been, according to surveys, slowly but steadily sliding downwards for the last 4 quarters. Why is there this mismatch between the macro and the micro?
No. That also, to some degree, is macro, the corporate and all. But first of all, that 7.6% growth is coming from somewhere. Growth is happening. So when you look at the economy as a whole, so all the various sectors, all the various firms, large and small, you see the growth, number one. Now, on corporate side, you seem to hear more complaints. Now, there are a couple of things to note there. One is that there were some legacy sectors that were inherited, which were in quite bad shape: steel, construction, some of the infrastructure, etc. Some of these still have not picked up to the level that they need to pick up, and so that's a bit of a continuation. On the corporate side also. Generally, the exports are coming from larger firms. Exports clearly have been tepid. Growth has been actually negative in exports. So even for the sectors and firms that are doing well otherwise, you see some complaints because exports are not doing as well. Then the third, of course, very important thing is that prices in the last 2 years have behaved a bit differently than in most other periods. So wholesale price index has been in the negative territory. It just barely has now come in the positive territory. Inflation in general has been low. What that means is that the prices are not rising, or for certain products prices are actually falling. So even if output is doing well, profits can be doing poorly because the prices are.
You've explained why the corporate sector, particularly in terms of private investment, is flat. When do you expect private investment to pick up?
First, let me say, even the corporate investment is, if you're referring to growth, that's one way to look at it. But the level of the corporate investment has not dramatically gone down or anything. As a matter of fact, the total investment has hovered around 30-31% in the last 2 or 3 years, and it's roughly in that territory. So small declines may have happened in one of these three years, but largely it has been around in the 30% territory. So we shouldn't really,
But savings and investment rates are down.
Sorry?
Savings and investment rates are down.
Tiny bit.
Only a tiny bit?
But the level.
Only a tiny bit?
No, yeah. Because if you're comparing, with the peak year, which was 7-8. In 2007-8, we had about, the savings rate at 35. and investment rate at about maybe 37.
So are you saying to me that this is more a perception that investment is flat rather than a reality?
No. Reality is some small decline, but to think that if the perception is that there has been a gigantic decline, that is then the perception issue.
A second issue of concern that's arisen during the last 2 years is oddly enough to do with ease of doing business. Now, the government is very proud of the fact that India has jumped 12 places in the World Bank's ranking. But just 2 months ago, the American Secretary of State for Commerce, Assistant Secretary of State for Commerce, had the following comment to make. US businesses still find it difficult to do business in India due to an inconsistent regulatory environment, systematic infrastructure bottlenecks, lack of transparency, and uncertainty in corporate governance rules. 5 days ago, the United States National Association of Manufacturers made precisely the same point in a letter to President Obama. How do you say to them that their perception is perhaps not in keeping with what the World Bank is reflecting? Or is the World Bank reflection mistaken?
Yeah. No. So this is always a perennial issue, perennial problem, when we analyze anything. There is the issue of level and there is an issue of change. Big change has happened. In some cases, it's not being measured very well because ease of doing business looks at Delhi and Bombay. We know that bigger changes and improvements have happened in places like Gujarat, Andhra Pradesh, even Jharkhand, etc. So that's one part of the story. But also, the government has inherited 60 years of regulation and barriers to entry, barriers to exit, all sorts of things. In 2 years, you're not going to be able to get rid of them all. The process is on. A lot of progress has been made, but when you start with a mountain, and even if you chop it off in certain parts of it, you still have a big mountain left.
You're saying there's a lot more to do before ease of business becomes what you would like it to be?
Well, what the Americans might want it to be, but also because remember that there is also this negotiating issue with the Americans always. So we have to be careful that those who are doing business here would certainly want less and less regulation, and so even when you make improvements, you will see the criticisms continuing.
Can I put this to you? In an article that you wrote for the Indian Express on the 17th, you said a campaign to improve ease of doing business has led to a significant simplification of procedures, especially in the states. Just 5 days ago, in an interview that he gave to the Business Standard, the finance minister said that actually improving ease of doing business in the states was his next big focus. Are the two of you saying different things?
I'm not sure. Finance minister said 5 years ago.
No, he said this 5 days ago.
5 days ago. No. But remember, you can make improvement, and yet making more improvement can be a goal. So I don't think we are saying different things. If you ask the finance minister whether we have made progress in the ease of doing business in the last 2 years or not, he'll certainly agree that there has been a significant improvement.
But you need to now focus particularly on the states where ease of business must improve. That is the new focus area.
Well, we have to keep going. Ease of doing business is not merely about regulations and the rules. It is also about a lot of the laws that exist, because after all, laws can also come in the way of doing business. So that process is also on, but it needs to go further.
A third area where there is a certain amount of concern is an apparent mismatch, and I use the word apparent deliberately, between record FDI inflows into the country and a sharp fall in investment proposals. Last month, the Commerce Ministry revealed that in 2015, India had received record inflows of FDI, the highest ever in any fiscal, totaling $51 billion. On Monday, the editor of the Business Standard, A.K. Bhattacharya, revealed, quoting the same DIPP sources, that investment proposals in 2014-15 had fallen by 23%, and the next year, 2015-16, had fallen by yet another 23%. And so people say, on the one hand, you have record inflows of FDI, on the other, you have 2 years of investment proposals falling by almost 25% per year. Is this an apparent mismatch? What is happening?
No. Again, why should that be a mismatch? Now, you have to look into these rules, how exactly these accounting, etc., is done. I'm sort of, I'm not quite familiar, but one possibility simply is that you get very large number of proposals, and some maybe half or some proportion of it eventually materializes. So therefore, the decline in the proposals may be quite consistent with still rising actual flows of investment. That's one possibility. The other possibility is that a lot of the foreign investment comes through the automatic route, and so therefore you may not see that reflected in the proposals. Again, as I said, it is a matter.
So this a bit like what we discussed earlier when we were talking about the decline or the perceived decline in private sector investment. This again is a perception problem, and the mismatch is more. It's not perception,
it's the data. In this case, we are discussing the data. The data are that the foreign investment has in fact gone up, and significantly so. That is clearly, and that is what you want. In the end, it's not just the proposals that you're interested in. Proposals are maybe an indicator if they are being measured over time in a consistent manner. But at the end of the day, what you want is what has happened to the foreign investment.
Let me then sum up this section of the interview by asking this question to you. Why is it that when you meet industrialists, why is it when you read the pink papers and you read commentators, why is it that the editorials all talk about a paralysis of private sector investment? As I said a moment ago, TN Nayanan, the chairman of the Business Standard, has actually in December coined the phrase, a paralyzed economy.
No. You see, the thing is that, first of all, in the media certainly criticism takes precedence over praise. It is a natural thing for the media to say that the negatives, and I've talked to your reporters, many of them, and they'll say that, well, negative does better. If I go with positive stories, my editor says, well, are you trying to do favors to somebody?
So this is in fact journalism conveying the wrong impression.
Partly, I'm just saying partly. But where the real perception may also be coming from is, not every sector of the economy is doing well. So if you talk to people in steel industry, they will say, yes, things are tepid. You go and talk to auto industry, auto parts industry, they'll tell you the opposite. So there are sectors of the economy that are doing well.
It depends on who you're talking to.
Partly it depends on who you're talking to.
So there are two factors here.
There is a third one. There is a third one, let me say. Which is the prices. So even when...
Do you mean inflation when you say prices?
Yes, because in the end, profits are measured in nominal terms. They are not measured in real terms. And when the inflation is low, profits do not rise as fast or may even decline. So rising output is completely consistent with decline in profit.
All right, I understand that. Let me then put to you something that the Governor of the Reserve Bank, Raghu Ramrajan, said in a speech in Pune last month, April. And this was his description of the state of the economy as it is today. I'm quoting him. We are still one of the poorest large countries in the world on a per capita basis and have a long way to go before we reasonably address the concerns of each one of our citizens. And then he added, the sobering thought is we have a long way to go before we can claim we have arrived. Would you agree with that characterization?
No, that all depends on what you mean by we have arrived. But the rest of what he is saying is that we started as an extremely poor country. We have made a lot of progress, but we are still at a per capita income of something like $1,500 per year, which is not a huge per capita income. And so there is some ways to go. But we ought to be very proud of the progress that we have made. We have come some distance. We could have come much farther had the policies of the past governments been much better.
So your interpretation of what he says is almost in agreement with him?
No. I'm not interpreting anybody. I'm simply saying, and nor do I wish to get into any debate about who said what and whether I agree or disagree. That is for the journalists to fight over. But I work for the government, and what I would say is that, if one says that, look, we have a long way to go, I think that's something reasonable to say for a country such as ours, where we are present.
On Monday, Subramanian Swamy, in a letter to the Prime Minister, which then was made public, accused the Governor of willfully and deliberately wrecking the economy, and Mr. Swamy then said to the Prime Minister that either Mr. Rajan should be sacked, or at least his tenure should not be extended when it expires in September. Would you wish to defend the governor?
No, no. Look, these are issues for the politicians and the government to deal with. I'm a professional economist.
I'm asking you as a professional economist, would you wish to defend him?
No, no. I would not get into any of those controversies. I think...
I understand. Another comment that Swami said is that because Rajan is a green card holder, he's mentally not fully Indian. I imagine, and correct me if I'm wrong, that as a Columbia University professor, you too are a green card holder. Are you mentally not fully Indian?
Well, it's, you know, for you to decide. I mean, my claim will always be suspect.
I would say you're totally fully Indian, mentally and physically. Is it therefore unfair to call green card holders mentally not fully Indian?
No, no, look, these are issues that I do not discuss. Okay. I am here to discuss the economy.
Let's come back to the economy.
Discuss the economy.
When you look at the way it's been covered in the last 6 months, there are two issues that stand up as terms of issues that have caused concern in the media and perhaps even amongst politicians. Let me put those to you. The first is non-performing assets. As a result, it said lending to the corporate sector has gone down substantially. As a result, it said corporate investment, private sector investment has also come down. Now, NPAs are said to be, by some reckoning, in excess of 4 lakh crore. There are some people who say that in the case of individual banks, their NPAs are greater than their net worth. As someone who observes this both as an economist and as vice chairman of NITI, how serious is the problem?
No, this is the one I have consistently said, that this is a serious issue and it needs addressing. The government has been trying to address it through recapitalization and some of the other measures that have been taken. We need to do a bit more perhaps, but I'll also tell you that this is one of the very hardest problems to solve. So whatever solutions that one thinks in terms of, which may be surgical solutions, they are not without risk. And this is the reason. This is the reason.
I want to come very much to the solutions you think are needed and haven't perhaps been implemented. But let me first put a contrary view to you. It comes from K.V. Kamath, who was head of ICICI Bank and was appointed by your government as head of the BRICS Bank in China. And he said, I believe this was reported by the Business Standard, that in fact this is an overblown problem. He says 13 years ago, China apparently had NPAs of $500 billion, which he says was at that time 50% of its GDP, and they were more than taken care of, A, by growth, and B, by what he calls asset resolution. He says India's NPAs are roughly between 5 and 10% of its GDP, and they can be similarly addressed. Is he correct, or is he being complacent?
It's certainly a possibility. So if our growth, you know, accelerates, we get to 8-9%, and the expectations improve that this growth will sustain. I think there is a lot of truth in what Mr. Kamath has said, that then with those changed expectations, a lot of the bad projects today which are troubled will begin to come out. So a lot of what may be NPS today may get into non-NPS tomorrow. And certainly the Chinese experience I have also seen reasonably closely. And in fact, this sort of problem that he points out for 13 years ago, I saw 30 years ago when I first went in 1990 to China, and this was on a World Bank mission. And the view of the mission was that there was, you know, crisis brewing in the banking sector in China. But here we are today, no crisis actually happened. China grew in the meantime 10%.
In which case, can I ask you this? If Mr. Kamath is substantially correct and growth can take care of what looks like a major problem today, almost of crisis proportions, what then are the major steps you think are needed? Because you said more needs to be done.
No, this is, yeah, but this is where the judgments would differ. And as I said, credit today. So part of the instrument for further accelerating growth and sustaining it at the higher level is also credit expansion. Now, so we get back to this chicken and egg problem that can credit expansion happen without the banks or the credit expansion be accelerated without the banks' health being improved? If yes,
what's your answer to that?
And no, I'm uncertain. No, this is
your answer.
This is.
What do you think needs to be done?
Well, so you see, in terms of solutions, the surgical solutions that people suggest, and again, as I've said, this is not a risk-free solution, and certainly whether we have the ability
Can I ask you to explain what are surgical solutions?
I will talking. So this is the what people have talked of, either the bad bank or the asset reconstruction company, where you then try to take the assets of the bad assets of the banks out, but this is a very complicated exercise. You need huge amount of expertise, which is relatively limited from what I am told in the country. So this is the reason. This is a difficult one.
Are you advocating this, but also at the same time saying that maybe the expertise is missing? Is that your position?
I'm not advocating this. I'm just suggesting that this is part of one of the possible solutions that we certainly look into the possibility of.
What are the other possible solutions?
Well, then you get back to faster recapitalization, maybe.
With the government.
But then we have to,
does that faster recapitalization require actually selling the equity of the banks in the market to raise the money?
Or equity somewhere, or maybe with higher taxation, but basically because you also have the fiscal constraint there, you do have to find some ways of raising revenue. So disinvestment, not necessarily from the banks, you could do some from the banks also, but you could do it elsewhere. But raising resources
is essential
to recapitalize.
There are some who say that what the government has done so far, set up a bank board bureau, bring in a few new people into a couple of banks, and to encourage mergers, is nowhere near adequate for the problem that looms on the horizon. What's your response to them?
No. This is where the Mr. Kamat's solution comes in. And if we really actually can write this with faster growth, then that certainly is an easier.
Is the government hoping to write this with extra growth, which is why it's not doing more in other areas?
No. What you do is governed currently by these two things. One, there is a fiscal constraint. So therefore, you have to respect that. Government is committed,
and the other,
and the other is the risks involved in the alternative solution of the asset.
But you're sounding as if the government has two choices and isn't clear about which to take, and therefore it's caught in a sort of indecisive moment.
No. Look, let me tell you one thing. That this is an issue that in one group we raised with Larry Summers. And his response was that in every one of these cases, when you look back, you never think that you did it too fast.
So in other words, the government should take its time.
Well, you have to be considered in any of the risky options. If you are going to exercise, then you got to be considered.
In the meanwhile, I believe it was earlier this week in the Indian Express, the Asia Pacific chairman of Boston Consultancy Group wrote an article to say that the government's present policy of encouraging mergers between public sector banks is precisely the wrong thing to do when NPAs are their biggest problem. He says this will A, deflect attention from the priority that is given to NPAs, and B, mergers create their own problems as new banks with different identities get used to being together and they then learn to relate with each other, and that will further retard the attention needed for NPAs. So he says this is the wrong time to encourage mergers, and yet this government, from what I understand, is keenly pushing for mergers. Is it pursuing two contradictory tracks?
No. But there is also the other view that you need consolidation of the banks. There is certainly if some specific analyst has one view, it doesn't mean he's the right view. This view that the banks need consolidation has been there for a fair bit of time. Actually, I have myself advocated that we need to consolidate. There are 27 public sector banks. Many of these are very small, and that sort of hampers the ability to compete. You need, if you got 4 or 5 larger banks, they will be better able to compete. Look at China. These. So
in other words, the impression I get is that the government accepts and realizes that the NPA situation is a critical one. It needs to be addressed. But how you address it isn't easy. There are many things you can do, but deciding between them is still something the government is balancing and weighing up. And giving the government a little extra time to make up its mind about what it wants to do is not a bad thing.
It's not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing.
So in the fullness of time, we will see the government reacting more forcefully.
We will see. We will see. Discussions are underway, and what solution the government adopts, we'll see.
Any idea over how much time frame we'll see?
Well, we should see it in the next year to two.
in the next year to two.
Yes.
We have that much time in hand.
Are you suggesting that we are in danger of having a banking crisis?
I'm not. I'm just asking.
Yeah. No, there is no. I mean, there is no danger of bank crisis or anything. Here, the issue simply is the credit expansion. But just for the credit expansion, what kind of risk you are willing to take in terms of solution that might be risky? You got to weigh the costs and benefits.
Professor Panagariya, let's take a break at that point. When I come back, I want to turn to the second issue that's become an issue of concern: job creation. We'll be back in a moment's time. There's a lot more still to come. Welcome back to a special episode of To The Point. I'm discussing the 2 years of the Modi government and its economic performance with the Vice Chairman of Niti Aayog and one of Columbia University's most renowned professors of economics, Arvind Panagariya. Let's come to a second issue of concern that has been in the papers. It's been talked about even in political circles for about the last 4, 5, 6 weeks, and that is to do with job creation. It's said that India needs to create 10 million jobs a year. Professor Rajiv Kumar, who's a sort of expert on the subject, says that he should actually put it at 12 million jobs a year. A recent survey released by the Labour Bureau of the Government of India says that India's top 8 labour-intensive sectors in 2015, the first full year of the Modi government, only created 1.35 lakh jobs, which is the lowest since the survey began in 2009, and more importantly, it's barely 1.35% of what's needed. Are you worried about the rate at which India is creating jobs?
No, job creation is top priority. It is clearly extremely important, perhaps the top priority it should be. So, yes, that we do. Now, the numbers, not sure, I think our system of collecting the numbers on employment I think requires some reform themselves.
So this Labour Bureau survey
there are issues.
Is questionable.
If you look back at if you look at, for example, Mohandas Pai has been writing about this, the EPFO numbers, they tell a very, very different story, that the job creation actually in 15-16, if you go by the EPFO numbers, is significantly larger and larger than in the previous years. I'm not suggesting that we adopt that approach, but that's something we
But you do accept that job creation is close to the top priority.
Yeah, job creation clearly in our country, and it's really not just about employment, because most people are sort of employed. If you look
better
at,
employment and more secure employment.
Let me explain. So if you look at our unemployment figures, they hover around 3%, 4%. So we are doing something. We are employed. The real serious problem is underemployment, and that reflects itself in. Give you two examples. Look at agriculture. We got 50% of the workforce in agriculture producing about 17% of the output. Clearly, such a large workforce producing relatively smaller proportion of output
is hugely underemployed.
And a similar situation exists in manufacturing. Look at the firms which are smaller than 20 workers. Though in those firms taken together, you employ about 73% of the manufacturing labor force, you produce about 12 to 13% of output.
But do you know what you're saying, Professor Panagariya? That in fact the problem of job creation could be greater than we realize, because the level of underemployment is disguised, and when you add the level of underemployment to unemployment, the combination could be fairly substantial and huge.
No. Remember, when I'm giving you this underemployment numbers, our unemployment figures are 3 to 4%. So you'll be adding those numbers to the 3 to 4%.
Can I put this to you? Professor Rajiv Kumar believes that the backlog of people without jobs, as well as those with unsatisfactory jobs, that would be the underemployed, could be touching 80 million. Sometimes he says it could be touching 100 million, somewhere in that range of 80 to 100 million. That figure is being added to every year by several million more. And then he writes, this was in the Times of India on the 29th of April, given declining exports, little pickup in foreign tourist arrivals, and persistent weakness in private investment, unemployment prospects do not look bright. He adds that Mr. Modi should make jobs, jobs and more jobs his #1 priority.
No, no, look, there is no question. Jobs is a very high priority of the government. What is inherited is a very serious structural problem. I have sometimes said this, that, you know, somehow or the other, what we have done in terms of the laws, in terms of the regulation, you know, the inflexibilities in the labor market, that hiring workers is not in the DNA of our entrepreneurs. That's not the first
because
thing I think
they can't
about.
sack them when they don't need them.
There are a lot of inflexibilities.
Since we're coming on to labor inflexibilities, and clearly that is one of the areas that needs to be tackled, put this to you. You really need to create more manufacturing jobs if you're going to create jobs for people
and not
in
just
millions.
manufacturing, but labor-intensive manufacturing.
Absolutely, which means SME jobs more than anything else.
Well, also large scale. No, no, no. Remember
Let me finish my point. Let me finish my point. Since we both agree that you need to create manufacturing jobs, and since we both agree that you need to create labor-intensive manufacturing jobs, what perplexes people is that the central government itself has not bitten the bullet of labor law reforms that would encourage manufacturing. It's left it to the states. Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh and Gujarat have done something. Haryana's in the pipeline, but that's it. Absolutely no more. Why is the central government not grappling with the issue of labor law reforms?
So, let me explain. So, the central, another area of reform related to manufacturing also was the land acquisition. If the government had not tried to reform that law, you would have said, if the central government had not tried to reform that law, everybody would have said, oh, central government did not try it. Now the central government has tried it. It did not go through the Rajya Sabha.
So it left it to the states?
We all say, or certainly the media comes in and says that, oh, what a mistake. There were no votes in Rajya Sabha. How can you have tried that?
You're saying once bitten, twice shy. The experience on the
labor,
land side means it can't do the same thing on the labor side.
Let me come to. On labor, the government has in fact tried. Some of the reforms have actually been done. The Indian Express article that you refer to, actually I document some of the ones that the central government did. Factories Act, Apprenticeship Act.
But the critical one of raising the threshold to 300 to make it easier to hire and fire hasn't happened.
Industrial Disputes Act. So now the government actually has been working on a complete consolidation of the labor laws into 4 or 5 different codes. That process has been underway.
But raising the threshold of the IDC is still not there.
But look.
ID, I mean, Industrial Disputes Act, that's still not there.
Yeah. No. But it is not an easy one to carry through in the Rajya Sabha today.
Can I interrupt you there?
Yeah.
You see, you're comparing it to the problem the government had in the Rajya Sabha versus Congress over the Land Reform Act. 3 times an ordinance couldn't get passed. Congress is bitterly opposed. The reason being, Congress actually saw the Land Reform Act of 2013 as its pet project. Therefore, it wasn't going to undermine it. But when it comes to labor law reform, I'm quoting from the Congress manifesto of 2014. Rahul Gandhi committed his party to recognizing the need for creating flexibilities in the labor market.
Does he say?
He says so. I'm quoting him.
Does he say Industrial Disputes Act?
He doesn't, but nor does yours.
No.
Nor does the BJP manifesto talk about the Industrial Disputes Act. Both talk about labor reforms without specifying what they mean.
So if it's not specified, you see...
but just a moment. You see, the position of both parties in 2014 on labor reform is identical. Therefore, if the government were to approach Rahul Gandhi and Sonia Gandhi and say, we need this because job creation depends upon it, you might get a different response.
No, look, these discussions have certainly been done. No, I'm not a politician, so I can't tell you the more details. What I can tell you is that the government certainly wants to do it.
And it got rebuffed by
Congress?
It is
difficult. No, I don't know. I don't know on this, so I can't tell you. But I have had discussions with the Labour Ministry, the Secretary Labour and all, and they have clearly, I had long meetings actually with the Secretary Labour and his team, and we have discussed these labour law reforms at great lengths, including
raising the threshold of the Industrial Disputes Act.
Look, raising the threshold from 100 to 300 also is not going to be enough.
No, absolutely. But it's a start.
So it's a start. But nevertheless, go back a little bit, Karan. Go back. Let us be fair. If the Congress really wanted to do this reform, what was stopping it? It was ruling for the last 10 years.
I understand, but that's not the question. The point is that
the question has to be that. Question has to be that.
No.
Or consider that question my answer to you.
Let me put this to you. I'll tell you why I raised this issue Because last year's economic survey, and that's a government document, unfortunately, I don't believe this year's economic survey spent as much time talking about the issue as last year's did, which is why I'm referring to last year's. It reveals that the rate of growth of labor force is significantly greater than the rate of growth of employment. And the second thing it reveals is the rate of growth of employment is several fold smaller than the rate of growth of the economy. And it doesn't take too much to say to yourself, if this continues for very long, could we end up in a dangerous position, not today, but several years down the road, could we end up in a dangerous position where India's demographic dividend, of which we take so much assurance and pride, converges into a demographic disaster?
No, look, first of all, just think about it. This government has been there for 2 years. For 60 to 65 years, what did we build? What did we do to change the situation?
I grant that. Not very much.
But
is this government responding with
so
adequate
much
speed to a problem that's built up and about to burst?
No, but look, so many regulations have been put in place. So piece by piece, efforts are underway. Within 2 years, good bit of progress has been made.
I mean, the problem is so big it can't be tackled easily and quickly.
If I may finish, even at the state level, this government has said that we will back up the change. And therefore, the change has happened in 4 states.
3 states. Haryana is in the pipeline.
No.
Haryana is in the pipeline.
I'll name you the 4 states. Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, Gujarat, Andhra Pradesh. Haryana has voted in the assembly.
It's in the pipeline.
That's a fifth. But 4 I have named.
Can I put this to you? I've heard your answer about the problem in tackling labor reform. And what it brings to my mind is that one of the reasons why people voted for the Modi government was their belief that Mr. Modi would bring in radical reform. And when he came in with 282, a majority on his own, and 330 with his allies, people were pretty confident that we would see sweeping dramatic changes. Now, land reform was attempted, given up, it's left to the states. 2 or 3 of them have taken it up, but that's it. GST is stuck in Parliament. Who knows how long it will be stuck there. We've talked about land reform. Right?
Let me talk.
I've heard what you've had to say, but it ain't going very far except for 3-4 states. And people turn around and say, the major radical reform I expected hasn't happened. I'm going to end with that and put this to you. What do you say to people who say the major reform we were hoping for hasn't happened? 2 years are over, 40% of the Modi government's time is over. That promise of radical reform, of dramatic change is unrealized.
No. Incorrect. First, only 2 years. But some of the big reforms, but big reform, you are completely missing out. The bankruptcy law. Everybody from both sides has been writing, those who are writing on reforms, has been saying this modern bankruptcy law is required. That's a complement to the labor law reforms. Bankruptcy law reform has happened. That act is in place, number 1. Number 2, even if you can actually get the labor laws changed in 3 or 4 states, which actually 4 states have happened, that's a huge progress. Businesses do not have to locate themselves in all 29 states simultaneously. Gujarat has a fantastic labor law now as far as the Industrial Disputes Act is concerned. So the businesses can locate in Gujarat. That alone,
only in special zones,
just
but you're
think
right.
of it.
You're right. Only in special zones, but you're right that the Gujarat law is better than others.
But how hard is it to declare a large establishment as special economic zone or a special investment region? It's not very hard to do that. So for all practical purposes, if you ask me, if somebody comes in and says, I'm going to invest $3 billion here, special economic zone will get created completely out of that $3 billion investment. So the door has been wide opened. And remember that China also did not create.
Can I interpret what you're saying as this? Look carefully, you're saying, and you'll actually see there is major reform that's happened. Bankruptcy is one. Look carefully at what Gujarat and other states have done. Actually, that provides a huge opportunity for labor law reform. Look at what some states are doing in terms of land reform. That provides another opportunity. It's happening state-wise, and it may not be happening nationwide, but it's creating opportunities which industrialists can use if they want.
Absolutely.
In other words, people need to open their eyes and look carefully, and you'll see the reform.
Absolutely, and we as the government also have to actually go out and make this known to the
very quickly,
investors.
You wrote an article, I believe it was in the Business Standard, where you spoke at great length about what this government had actually achieved in terms of infrastructure development. Development of roads, development of railways, development of electricity. And when I read that article, it was eye-opening. And I said to myself, I don't know about these achievements. I'm suddenly finding out about them, and there was detail there in chapter and verse. Why has this government not communicated that to the country so that the country knows? Why is it you writing in the business paper on the op-ed page is making the country aware? Why is this not something the government is trumpeting at press conferences and ministers are trumpeting at their speeches?
Well, it is being done. Maybe I wrote it in a single piece, all of it together, so you could see the full picture. But in the statements of the various ministries and ministers, you would see much of the information that I gave out.
Is communication by this government a problem? Is this government failing to communicate what it's doing, which is why people think it's not done enough?
Well, look, communication also has to be done by the media.
But ministers have to speak first.
When I was outside the government, I saw this as one of my duties and functions to inform the people.
But Professor Panagariya, this government has ministers who don't talk, they don't give interviews. You're writing about it in an op-ed page of the Business Standard, and that's how I found out. But ministers should be trumpeting their achievements and asking for a pat on the back, and they're strangely silent. Is silence their enemy?
No. Even I have read several reports actually where the ministers are reported to have given out many of these
and
numbers.
The media's ignored them.
No. At least in the print media I have seen, they're there. They're there, and please, a lot of the ministers have actually given interviews with you.
Actually, the truth is very few are giving interviews to me, but leave that aside. I'm grateful that you spoke to me. A pleasure talking to you.
Thank you.